As humans started to harness new materials and live in different ways, they found that certain materials were much easier to work with and much easier to find than other materials were. You see, if you think back to human history, one of the first things that ever took place was what we call the Stone Age. And during the Stone Age, we humans actually were using stones for a lot of our tools, but we also use tons of wood and animal parts and bone and sinew in order to accomplish the tasks that we needed to. It's because they're readily available. They're everywhere. You can find them easily. But they don't necessarily have the properties that are always the best for the situation that we were in. Eventually, some humans found certain metals, and those metals were actually just naturally existing as the metal that they were. To give you some examples of what I'm talking about, let's think about some of the metals that humans really first had access to. Some of the most important metals that we were able to find early on would have been things like gold, silver, things such as lead, and even mercury. What do these things all have in common? Well, they all have the ability to not really be oxidized. They don't oxidize easily. And what that means is we can actually find these in nature as their pure elemental selves. You can actually go into certain areas and find things like a vein of these particular metals. And because you could actually extract these from the ground, people were able to just pull them out and use them as they needed to. A lot of those materials and those metals that humans really were first able to find when they pulled them out of the ground were useful for creating certain things such as pots and containers and jewelry. But if you think about some of the properties that those materials have, is that they tend to be rather flexible as well, so they don't make the best tools. Eventually, humans reached a point when they realized they could actually melt and combine metals to create what we would call an alloy. That is when we actually have a mixture of different metals giving us different properties. And one of the most important ones that they invented was something called bronze. During the Bronze Age, humans actually learned if you extract copper and combine it with small amounts of things like tin, you can create a material that is much more robust, still very corrosion resistant, and able to be worked with in order to create different tools. The advent of the Bronze Age actually allowed humans to start doing things a lot more easily because they had tools that would be able to withstand that kind of stress. One of the biggest changes in human history, though, was actually being able to utilize reduction reactions to help purify iron. You see, iron easily oxidizes, and that means that over the course of the history of the Earth, most iron had actually turned into different kinds of what we would call ore, essentially rock where we had iron oxides all mixed throughout. By the time that humans had reached the Iron Age, what they had really done is figured out how to use a process called bloomery. And in this process, you essentially were able to take iron oxides, such as, let's say, like Fe2O3, and drive a reduction reaction to produce solid iron and oxygen gas. By doing so, they can actually heat this to the right temperature that they would not melt the iron, but there was enough energy to drive this reaction to actually create pure iron. This led to the ability to create new tools, and the creation of new tools meant the creation of much harder materials, much more efficient machinery, and meant that humans actually had an easier time with all of the work that they were doing. The advent of the Iron Age totally led humans into a revolution that enabled them to farm much more easily, to be able to create all sorts of materials for the different purposes that they needed. Eventually, humans even were able to figure out that adding different substances into that iron would be able to create steel, a much harder, much more corrosion resistant, and much more durable and flexible material than they had ever really had before. See, redox reactions are kind of at the core of human material development. Harnessing them really enabled humans to be able to do different things because they were able to get new materials that they never had access to. You may think of redox reactions as just like the transfer of electrons, but really over the course of human history, they shaped our cultures in the way that they are today. They changed everything about the way that humans lived and provided them new materials that they then were able to extract from natural resources that they found around them. And I hope this gives you a sense of how you can actually understand chemistry in a bigger sense than just a few reactions. Chemistry really is humans harnessing their materials in order to make their lives a little bit easier and create things that they wanted to, but doing that always comes with a few problems. Manipulating the world around us to make the substances we want always requires energy and always creates byproducts. It's just an inevitable part of chemistry. And that's really why I love talking about chemistry so much. When you get to see the grand picture of chemistry, you see it's not just a few things, it's actually human history. So thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.